In the barren late 50s, it was left to individuals like George Eastham, a graceful inside right, to keep the crowds entertained. Ivor Allchurch gave United more moments to cherish than most in a career that brought the club into the 60s. It took perhaps Tyneside's favourite adopted Geordie to rekindle the blazing triumphs of the previous decade. Yorkshireman Joe Harvey, the victorious Wembley captain, came back in June 1962 to become manager and a permanent fixture at St James Park. But the first job of the former Workington boss was to build a team to regain First Division status. By his third season, Harvey had shrewdly assembled a promotion squad. The balding head of Jim Eiley, a £17,000 buy from Nottingham Forest, was to provide much of a revived United's sense of purpose.
Has scored Jim Eiley.
The ex-England wing half Stan Anderson was stolen from arch-rival Sunderland.
A magnificent goal. Well, Taylor with the corner, and what a tremendous goal from Stan Anderson. Well, my goodness, there it is.
Ron McGarry, a bustling centre-forward from Bolton, was to prove another colourful wearer of the number 9 shirt.
Just inches wide, a good effort by McGarry. To McGarry. And there it is, the third goal.
There was young local talent too. Alan Suddick had been one of the club's youngest debutants at 17 years and 158 days.
Pushing it through for Suddick, and what a glorious goal. Glorious goal by Alan Suddick, took his time there.
And a teenager, then known more formally as Brian Robson, was in the early stages of accumulating a double century of league goals.
The ball down, playing his usual immaculate game for Newcastle this afternoon. Teeing the ball up for the other players, slipping it through for Robson, and what a beautiful goal. Well,
sure, it was obviously very difficult for me at times as a young player and as a pretty quiet lad. He was very strong, but yeah, I admired him tremendously, you know, because of his own achievements and the stories that you were told about his success. And obviously it was Newcastle. Joe Harvey was linked with Newcastle United. But I got in early when he first came, so I came as a young player. And so I was one of the few young players that he brought in. So he always gave me a chance. But Stan Anderson pushed me a lot at that time, Jimmy Greenoff, who were wanting younger players to come through and break through and obviously be ready to try and get experience before they went in the First Division. But he had a great sense of humour, you know. You were frightened of him though. I mean, you had that fear and obviously the respect.
Newcastle marched back to the top flight after a 4-year exile. But there were to be few celebrations over the next 2 seasons as Newcastle fought successive, but ultimately successful, relegation campaigns. But Harvey's transfer market skills had by no means deserted him. He paid a club record £80,000 for Welsh centre-forward Wyn Davies, who was to form an increasingly dangerous partnership with the maturing Pop Robson.
Good play by Wyn Davies. And there's the second. It is Brian Robson's second goal. Look at his smiling face. Now Robson with a kick. Brian Robson, it's a good one. They're all in there. Davies, and it's there. Wyn Davies has scored.
Wyn played particularly well at that time and probably I would think at the best stage of his career, and I fed off him and I got a lot of success through it. I got about 55 goals in 2 seasons, 31 season, 25 the next, and had a bad season when I scored 9.
There's Tommy Gibb, Davis, and Gibb, beautiful running by Gibb. And there it is, Brian Robson has scored. What a goal, what a goal. That's as fine an example as we can possibly show you. Just a half slip, and now here's Scott for Newcastle. And Robson, and there it is.
In 1968, despite finishing a modest 10th, Newcastle were to set off on a football adventure that made headlines well beyond Tyneside. It started with a spectacular 4-0 win against the powerful Dutch side Feyenoord. It was their first taste of a very different cup experience, the European Fairs Cup.
We didn't really realise what we're doing then. We were actually making history for Newcastle United. But again, it was like almost like playing in the Anglo-Italian cup at the time. It was the same sort of feeling about it. We didn't think it was that, at least I didn't think it was that important to the people. Having said that, must have been a bit naive as well, because there was 50,000 people turning up every home game. And I remember the first game against Feyenoord, I think it was the Geordies' way of saying, right, we're now going at the big time, we're going to support you to the hilt, which of course they did, because I don't think there's ever been a team who got into Europe got such an immediate reaction from the fans as we did at Newcastle.
Those fans positively revelled in the novelty of continental football. They travelled to Rotterdam for the second leg, confident they could sit back and enjoy the scenery. But United were about to undergo their first lesson in the European game. They needed that 4-goal cushion as the Dutch showed their true worth. Newcastle were pleased to escape with a 2-goal defeat, but the bandwagon was rolling. And as their own chairman said, Newcastle were daft enough to go and win it. Sporting Lisbon were disposed of by a single goal at St James after a 1-1 draw in Portugal. The goals flowed in the third round against the Spaniards from Real Zaragoza. It proved to be the 2 United scored in the first leg that were crucial. A 2-1 win at St James meant 8 were shared, but the away goals rule saw the Magpies fly on.
The atmosphere and incidents that happened, when you remember, I think it was Sporting Lisbon, just about 5 o'clock, there was a snowfall, and there was about 2 or 3 inches, and I mean, they hadn't seen snow. They came on the pitch and they had stockings rolled on their hands. I mean, they were frozen, and I mean, I think we ended up winning that game. Just incidents like that, and obviously 55,000, 60,000 people in here. It just, the whole stadium took off. I think I scored a goal after about, I think it was my first touch of the ball, after about 2 minutes. The players just lifted, and it's fantastic, fantastic atmosphere.
Actually, it was another Portuguese side, Vitória Setúbal, who slid to a 5-1 defeat, but no mistake about the young Robson's 2 goals. The semi-final against Glasgow Rangers will always be remembered for the hordes who invaded the pitch when Newcastle went 2 up in the second leg, but they couldn't stop United marching into the final. 60,000 crammed into St James for an unforgettable first leg against the Hungarians, Újpest Dósa.
Gibb with the kick. Wyn Davies got a real chance. Moncur, and it's there. A goal. Moncur again for Newcastle. Keeping this defence under pressure all the time. Moncur. And a goal, his second goal. Aaron Toft. Scott still going. It's a goal and a good one. Jim Scott, the scorer.
And we go over there and we're playing. It was nice. It was a balmy night, and just to warm up, which you had to do, you had to go out and warm up for 15 minutes. Then you're allowed to come back in, and you all went out together again. Well, we had warmed up first. Joe had been watching the opposition warm up, and he came in the middle of the dressing room just before. He says, "Hey, these lads don't have to look red hot." What? He says, "They're knocking 50, 60-yard passes straight to feet." He says, "And they're sharp, very, very sharp. We've got a problem here." And we were sat there 3-0 up. That was Joe. We went out, and sure enough, as the story goes, we got well hammered in the first half, and it could have been 4 or 5-0 at half time. Anyway, when we come in, eventually we get in at half time, and Joe's not to be seen because he's had to make his way from the box, or at least the stand. Eventually comes in, by which time we are sat in the dressing room, and I'll never forget, the sweat was just dripping on the floor. Our heads were bowed. It was then, we were still leading, 3-2, wasn't it? And Joe came in, eventually, smoking his cigarette, charges through the door, and we were all sat heads down, and I said to Frank Clark, if ever we needed a bit of help from the gaffer, now is the hour. Joe came in, his first words, "What's the matter?" Well, what's that effect? And there was silence, and I says, "Well, Gaffer, I don't know if you noticed, but for the first half we've been destroyed. It could have been 6 apart from Willie McFall having a blinder, and the crossbar and the post, it could have been 6. He says, "No problem." He says, "All you got to do is score a goal." Again, silence, and again I spoke up and I said, "You have been watching the game, haven't you? We haven't been over the halfway line." And he said, "Never mind all that," he says, "all you got to do is go out and score a goal." Well, as history would have it, we go out and we score, and he says, because these foreigners, they'll collapse like a pack of cards. He said, they're all the same, foreigners, got no gumption. Sure enough, we go out and score, and of course, what happens? They do collapse like a pack of cards. We eventually get in after winning the cup, quite easily, as it turned out. And we get in, and Joe's missing again. The time we've got the cup in the dressing room, Joe makes his way back down, walks in with a big cigarette again. He says, I told you, no problem.
And so in this opening minute of the second half, Bobby Monker has gone onto the line. There's the cross. Davis is there, and it's blocked away. Comes back to Simta, and again. Monker, and Monker scored! That's Monker again! Fantastic! Rather slippery, I would say. Come out to Scott. Scott with a chance. Scott with a shot. Ben Aronsoft, it's a goal! A lovely goal! Newcastle have equalised! What a great shot by Ben Aronsoft! Davis winning that one in the air. Foggon going through the centre. Foggon all by himself. Foggon almost taken down. And Foggon has hit the crossbar. He scored!
That 3-2 win in Eastern Europe prompted another hero's return to Tyneside. It was the club's first trophy in 13 years. How perfectly right United had won it on Joe Harvey's 50th birthday. The silverware was back in their old skipper's familiar grasp.
Wish we were in the First Division so we could go in Europe again. This sets this crowd alight. Europe really did.